You are listening to I Am Refocused Radio with your host, Shamaya Reed. This show is designed to inspire you to live your purpose and regain your focus. And now, here's your host, Shamaya Reed.
Hey, welcome to I Am Refocused Radio. We are here once again. Today, we have an amazing show lineup for y'all today. We have a special guest today. Our guest today is Amanda Blackwood, and we're going to talk about the topic of spot the signs of danger, how to recognize hidden dangers in everyday life and what to do about them. Amanda does a lot of great things. She also has a podcast herself, The Survivor, by Amanda Blackwood, and we're going to learn a little bit more about her today. So first and foremost, Amanda, how are you doing?
I am doing fantastic. And how are you doing today?
All is well. All is well. Appreciate your time being on with us today. So you have a story about trauma to triumph and overcoming human trafficking. Can you kind of set the tone for us? Tell the audience a little bit about yourself and lead to today's discussion.
So with most victims of human trafficking, we are no strangers to early childhood abuse and trauma. But it's also important to understand that trafficking happens to people who are not children also. We seem to be preoccupied with the thought that it only happens to children, but children only make up 1/4 of all the victims here in the U.S. So I grew up being molested and abused. I was molested for the first time at 4. Again, at 12, 13, 15, 16, I was raped at 17 by somebody I thought was my best friend. When you grow up in kind of that environment, my father was also physically abusive. My mother was mentally and emotionally abusive. I started to have incredibly low self-esteem and real struggles with trying to understand who I was. So I started looking for love and acceptance wherever I could get it because it seemed like I wasn't finding it anywhere that I was looking. Any of the normal places that somebody would be able to find something like that would be in their own family. So when you can't find that where you're living, you look for it wherever you're not living. And I started running away from home when I was only 15 years old. As a runaway, I kept on putting myself in some pretty dangerous situations, just trying to get out of the one dangerous situation I was in every single day. I kept on thinking there was something better out there. At 18 was the first time I was trafficked. It was by a man who was more than twice my age, who was at that time my boyfriend I was living with. He was pretty slick. He offered me the things that I was looking for in my life. He offered me stability and what I perceived to be love. And once he had me under his control, he was able to force me to do things that I didn't want to do. Pretty quickly, I've wised up and figured it out. And got out of there. At 19, I had gone to Florida to go and stay with my grandmother because I needed surgery done on my knee. And when I got to Florida, I did not have her home address and I didn't know how to get to her place. This was back in 1999, so I didn't have a GPS, even if I did have her address. And I called her from the Daytona Beach bus station for them to come and pick me up. It was about 10:30 at night. And when my grandmother's husband, my dad's stepfather, answered the phone, instead of coming to get me, they said, "We're not coming to get you. You're on your own and good luck." And then they hung up the phone. And a young couple came and found me and they took me in. And again, they offered me what it was I was needing most in that moment, which at that point wasn't love. It was a roof over my head and some sense of stability. And they said that they were going to give me a place to stay until I could get on my feet. But what they really meant was that they were going to give me a place to stay until they could find the highest bidder. Because they sold me to a young man by the name of Esteban, who then locked me up in a small room for about 23 and a half hours with no food, no water, and no bathroom facilities. When I managed to get out of this small room, I actually wrote a book about that one. I was terrified and I was on the run for my life and just trying to find anything and anywhere that I could go. I wanted to get as far away from Florida as possible, so I moved out to California. And during the next several years while I was living in California, I met a man who lived in Scotland, and we got to know each other very well. While I was having dinner, he was having breakfast, so we would have video chats together and have, these fun conversations. And just kind of got to know each other. And over a period of 7 years, he watched me go from being an actress on Alias and Will and Grace and modeling for Harley Davidson to getting a job eventually that turned out to be an actual career as the director of public safety and security for 6 properties in LA County. And he watched me grow from this very abused, sheltered person to somebody who had a sense of stability and strength. I was still lonely and I still wanted eventually to have a relationship in my life, but I was okay with things as they were. But 7 years after meeting this man, he finally asked me to get a fiancé visa and move to Scotland to be with him and marry him and spend the rest of my life with him. And after 7 years, we were both convinced that we were in love with each other. So I dropped everything and got rid of my car, my apartment. I left my job and I moved over there to be with him. And it took him 7 years to get me there. And he was definitely playing the long game because it took him 7 days to start trafficking me. This is the last time I was trafficked. At that point, I was 31 years old. I was stuck in a foreign country. He had my passport, my driver's license, my debit card, everything. I tried multiple times to get out of there by purchasing an emergency flight home. I tried to commit suicide. I tried to drink my way to having blackout drunk moments. And I constantly failed at these things. And eventually, after 5 months of being there, I sat him down and we had a very candid conversation. And I had to make him believe that I had something called Stockholm Syndrome or trauma bonding, and that I would give up literally anything for him. And I was madly in love with him, in spite of the truth, which was I needed to get out of there. And I knew that if I didn't, I was going to die. I convinced him so well that eventually that evening, within 2 hours of the conversation, he had purchased a round trip flight for me to leave Scotland, go back to the US and spend the next 6 months there so I wouldn't get in trouble with the visa authorities and be able to return in time for Christmas. I tried to disappear as soon as I got back to the States. He continued to attack me. He had taken a bunch of photos and videos of my rapes and molestations while I was there. Every time I got a new job, he would email these to my boss. Every time I got a new friend, he would email them to my friends. He was posting them on different social media, photo sharing websites. It was absolutely devastating. I went into hiding for a long time. Finally, I realized this wasn't ever going to stop as long as I was on any kind of social media under my own name. Or it was never going to stop as long as I was still living in California. So in 2016, I finally packed up an SUV and I moved out to Colorado. And in 2019, I discovered that he had taken all these same photos and videos and he put them up on a pornography website. And he made me famous on a porn site. He also included any kind of information that he could find on me, including any social media, personal contact information, telephone numbers and addresses for places where I used to live. Probably the most devastating moment for me in all of this wasn't the actual physical abuse. It was the learning about the continued exploitation afterward and how he was still making money off of me. I was recognized one day in a grocery store, not because of being on Alias or Will and Grace or modeling for Harley Davidson or any of the really cool things that I'd done, but because of the pornography. This guy recognized me from a rape video and he asked for my autograph. It completely destroyed me in a way that most people can't even begin to imagine. So I reached out to an anti-trafficking organization out here in Colorado. They immediately paired me up with legal services, a pro bono legal team that was going after the pornography websites and having them pull everything down. But every time one went down, another went up. And it seemed like the whole fight was never going to end. So I reached out to a different anti-trafficking organization who paired me up with a therapist because I wasn't sure how I was going to get through this. I wasn't even sure if I wanted to get through this. I was kind of done with life at that point. I was right then 39 years old and I had had 39 years of abuse. I didn't know what to do with myself. And they paired me up with a therapist. And that first therapist, I'm pretty sure I traumatized her to the point where she was left the industry completely. She's never going to practice therapy again. She was pretty new at that point. So they paired me up with a second therapist. And the second therapist, I made sure that we both went into it with our eyes wide open. She had already worked with other survivors of trafficking. So having her be somebody who'd already experienced some of this was helpful to me. But I also went in with two very strict rules that I gave to her. I said, number one, do not come with me with prescription medication. I don't want a Band-Aid. I want a shovel. And number two, do not walk on eggshells. Don't pull the punches. Don't treat me like I'm some porcelain doll that's easily going to break. If I was going to break, I'd have done it already. Now let's get busy. Within a year and a half, we were done with therapy. Shortly after that, I wrote my autobiography of survival. Shortly after that, I began painting, and my art career was completely launched. And immediately after my book was published in June of 2021, which was my 10-year anniversary of freedom from trafficking, was when I met my husband. And my entire life completely changed because I had done all of this hard work and digging deep, trying to solve the mystery of who I was and how to fix the issues that existed in my life. Now, if I hadn't done all that work, I wouldn't have this incredible life that I have now.
Once again, let's on Refocus Radio talking to our guest, Amanda Blackwood. And like you said moments ago, you got into art and you published over a dozen books. You also are talking on multiple stages and different platforms. I know the topic is for today is spot the signs of danger. So for you looking in the past, someone who's listening right now who may feel like someone could be going through this, what are some of the signs that you know now that can help somebody who hears this episode?
Well, a lot of people can be spotted as being more vulnerable to being trafficked if they have things like that unstable living situation that I seemed to constantly have when I was younger. Even when I got over that unstable living situation, there were still some signs. So um, the history of violence in my life. I was a teenage runaway. I experienced other forms of violence like sex abuse, domestic violence. Um, I was constantly facing poverty. I was always in need. These are the needs that traffickers can have a much easier time trying to fill and promising to people so that they can kind of get them under their control. There's other signs also. Some of the signs that I did not experience myself were the signs of being addicted to drugs and alcohol. People who have a chemical dependency are more vulnerable to trafficking because, again, this is another need that's easy for the traffickers to be able to fill, as well as an emotional bonding with them. Even if the traffickers don't actually feel it, they can very easily emulate these emotions. And as far as the traffickers go, there's no evidence that traffickers are more likely to be of any particular race, any nationality, gender, sex orientation, religion, or political affiliation. Most of the time, traffickers are family members or romantic partners. They are not people who are snatching people off of the streets. It's less than 15% of all victims are actually kidnapped for the purposes of trafficking. And the reason for that is because if you have these people who have these needs in their lives, they're addicted to drugs, they're looking for love, they're looking for a roof over their head, they need some sense of stability. It's much easier to fill those to make somebody reliant on you rather than kidnapping somebody off the street who's absolutely going to fight like their life depends on it, because it does. They're going to take the easy way out. These traffickers aren't in it for the fight. They're in it for the money. It's also important to recognize the definition of human trafficking. This isn't something that I would suggest people necessarily Google, because Google has it wrong. Look at someplace like the Department of Homeland Security. They define human trafficking as the use of force, fraud, or coercion to obtain labor or commercial sex acts from another person. So if you notice, there's no mention of movement, there's no mention of transportation. There's also no mention of money outside of the word commercial sex acts. And commercial sex acts doesn't always mean money. This can be stuff that is provided in trade, like drugs or alcohol or trips or vehicle ride, anything, any number of things. And while we do have this issue with believing that human trafficking and human smuggling are the same thing, they're both very different issues that often overlap and they both need to be addressed. So, recognizing what it actually is going to be the first step to understanding what it is that you're looking for when you see other people are being vulnerable to this.
And for those who are listening to this right now, what are sources if someone happens to be in this situation?
A big one is the National Human Trafficking Hotline. There are international organizations as well, but the National Human Trafficking Hotline is really easy to find. Just humantraffickinghotline.org. They have a telephone number, they have a text-in number, they have an online chat, and it's 100% confidential. There's actually a quick exit button on their website. So if somebody is on their website and trying to find information, if they hit the quick exit button, it takes them to just a basic Google page, and it gets rid of that having been in their internet browser history. It's very, very safe for people to be able to do this. A lot of people are afraid to call the police when it comes to trafficking. In my case, the last man that trafficked me, that man in Scotland when I was 31 years old, he actually was a police officer. A lot of people are nervous about this. They don't want the police to get involved because they're afraid that they're going to get in trouble for being prostituted out, because that's typically what happens. So there's this brand new service that has rolled out in recent years called 988. So if you dial 911, you get the police, you get the fire, you get that whole rigmarole with shiny bright lights. If you dial 988, you actually get paired up with a therapist, and quite often somebody with lived experience. They can talk to you, help you find the resources that you need, talk you down from the edge. If you are on the edge of doing something drastic, you can get the help that you need to be able to get out of these situations. It's not easy to recover from this stuff. It's not easy to be able to move beyond that pain, but it's absolutely worth it. I would highly suggest anybody who knows somebody who's going through this, talk to them about these resources and let them know that they're available.
With the platform you have now and your ability to continue to live your life, what keeps you motivated to not just push forward, but to enlighten people on this issue?
I think probably my greatest support is my greatest why. And that would be my husband. When I first met him, I had done all this hard work. I was really proud of myself, and I felt like a completely different person. I felt like I was going through life at that point, living on cloud nine. And right before we got married, right before we met, actually, I was rear-ended in a car accident that left me short-term disabled. And I wasn't able to return to work for a long time. And when my short-term disability ran out, and I looked at the need of having to go back to work, I had an absolute full-blown panic attack, because I realized at that point how absolutely terrible my work environment had been and how abusive the situation had been. And my husband was really supportive. And he said, you know what? You don't have to do this. You don't need to go to work. I make enough money for you to do what it is that you're most passionate about. And I can see what you're most passionate about. I've read your books. I watch you when you speak on stages. Go and do that. Do that full time until you're tired of it, until you're exhausted, until you can't do it anymore. And if that never happens, then just keep doing it. And because of him, I've been able to put together my trauma recovery mentorship, my one-on-one program, my workbook series. I'm speaking on all these stages and wonderful podcasts like yours. It has been a game changer in my life just to have that supportive person in my life. And I know that not everybody gets that in their life from another person. But it's also important to recognize that if you have that ability to provide that kind of stability and that encouragement to yourself, you definitely should do it. I probably would not have gotten that far without him, but it's absolutely possible to do it also.
Once again, listen to Refocus Radio, talking to our guest, a man in Blackwood. And I know I said in the beginning you had a podcast, The Survivor, but you also have another second podcast. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Because that podcast, Darkness, the Growth from Darkness podcast, is syndicated on radio in Australia.
Yes, absolutely. I'm so proud of my two podcasts. So the first one, I interview authors who have overcome traumas, and that's The Survivors. And Growth from Darkness has been really kind of a fun, it started out as an experiment. So it started earlier this year. The co-host of mine lives in Australia. And when she and I first talked, it was because she was a guest on The Survivors. She was an author who had written about her own life experiences of overcoming severe abuse. And she was opening up about all of this. And I thought she was incredibly brave, but we really hit it off. And that comes across in this other podcast. So she and I, we get together every 2 weeks and we talk about what a trauma reaction is and break down all the different trauma reactions. Each different episode is a different trauma reaction, what the long-term consequences are of not dealing with it, and then how to fight back against that to retrain your brain so that you can have a better life. Because trauma reactions are very helpful in the moment, and they can be helpful for a while after the trauma. But if we continue to allow ourselves to react in these ways, we're reinforcing bad behaviors, and we're telling ourselves that it's okay to lash out at people for things that they haven't done to us. We have to learn how to retrain our brain to walk away from that kind of stuff, or it's never going to be very helpful in any kind of relationship we ever have. We will be the dysfunctional member in a relationship.
With someone like yourself who's been through years of trauma and you survived them for a long time, I should add, what would you say to someone who could be going through what you're going through? What would you say to them and how they should go about not just finding help, but remaining strong?
It's important to recognize that if you don't know what resources are available to you, it's the same as not having those resources. So first of all, take a moment, take a step back, and look for what resources might be available to you, no matter what it is that you're going through. But also, we've all grown up hearing the phrase, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And that is a lie. The man who coined that aphorism in the 1800s was a man by the name of Friedrich Nietzsche, who later died in an insane asylum. I think it's time we can let go of what he says. The truth is not that the abuse and the abusers are what made us stronger. The truth is that we've always had that strength within us. We just have to dig a little deeper sometimes to find it. We are put through these trials. We are facing things that most of humanity will never really understand. But there are those of us out there who do, who will, and who always have. Find your tribe of people. Reach out to the support groups. Find resources that are available to you. And recognize yourself for the strong and courageous person that you are, even when you don't feel like it. Because you're still here, you're still alive, you're still going. That makes you strong and courageous already.
Last question for you is, when you look back and you look now, how do you celebrate what you've been able to overcome?
Celebration can come in so many beautiful ways. Sometimes it is with the start of writing a new book. It might be fiction instead of nonfiction. Sometimes it is going to the 1940s ball out here in California and Colorado. I'll save up and go to this special event to maybe buy myself a new dress. But mainly, my favorite way to celebrate now is to cook something that I've never made before and feed my husband something that I know he's going to love. Because to me, you can't really celebrate without sharing it with somebody else. And sharing it with him is the joy of my life.
Once again, talking to our guest, Amanda Blackwood. For those who are listening, how can they best support you, and what's the call to action you want them to take?
The best way to support me is to visit my website and take a look at everything that you see there. Tell somebody about the Trauma Recovery Mentorship, or purchase a copy of the Growth from Darkness workbooks for somebody who's going through hard times. This is not just to support me, but this is to support the people that you love and you care about. That website is growthfromdarkness.com, because we can all grow from the darkness that we've had to experience and live through.
Millions on Refocus Radio, talking to our guest, Amanda Blackwood. I want to say, once again, thanks for your time being on the show.
Thank you very much.